Hey, I'm Nick, and today I'm going to be talking about the importance of actually using the advice that you are given, even if you're unsure on whether or not it's actually going to work. Now, I know not all advice is going to be correct, is going to work, just because someone who has had a lot of experience in the thing that you're trying to get better at or that you're trying to get advice towards doesn't mean that it's automatically going to work. And this is from a couple of things. It can also be that they don't have the right sources to fit your particular situation. And so the person giving the advice may not actually understand the problem that actually needs fixing, especially so if the information is found online where the person most definitely has no idea what your specific needs are. But whether or not that advice is good or bad, all advice needs action. There's no point in receiving advice, in giving advice, if the end goal is not for action to be taken. And this also leads into actually finding out if that advice is good or bad, with the exceptions of the advice that is obviously not going to work for your specific situations. But for the vast majority of them, the conclusion has been made that this advice would most likely suit you, and so it is up to your responsibility to carry through with it to find out whether or not that advice is good or bad. And this is especially important to make sure that you're actually keeping an open mind about the subject at hand. It may be easy to think to yourself that, yeah, I'm being really nice and letting everyone incorporate their opinions into it, but I simply know for a fact that it won't work. Now, like I mentioned, that may be true, but unless you've used that advice before or a similar form to it, you don't actually know whether or not it is good or bad. Advice needs action to figure out whether or not it is good or bad. Now, that may sound obvious for some people, but the biggest handicap to that is that people don't want to waste time. They don't want to take an advice that they're not sure whether or not it's good or bad and leave it up to chance to see whether or not it'll work, which can then make it easier to ignore the advice once again. But like I mentioned with advice, the whole point of it is that action is meant to be taken with them. In fact, you'd be wasting less time following through with advice that you were given, finding out that it was actually bad advice and that there were problems wrong with it, than to disregard it entirely in the first place. As you now know of flaws that may appear in other advice that you may be given. But on the chance that the advice actually works, then hey, you've actually gotten help with the thing that you wanted. Now, even if you think of your time as being very, very valuable and you do not want anything that may have the chance of being bad advice and may have the chance of wasting your time, then by seeking out advice and not following through with it unless it is absolutely going to be 100% useful, then you're already wasting your time. You need to supply that room for error with advice to be able to find the gems that actually work instead of wasting your time going through endless amounts of videos or looking up or however you're getting your advice just to find one that sounds good but may end up not being good advice anyways. But like I mentioned before, bad advice is not always a waste of time. The most important thing that we're doing is not spending so long looking for advice that we're wasting our time. Even if you find bad advice, you have now pinpointed the inaccuracies in them and are able to give yourself better advice with them. You're able to find your own tips, your own advice. And like I mentioned at the start of the video, it can be hard for even experts to give you proper advice because they don't know the actual parameters that you're working with. And so by process of elimination, you're able to narrow down and actually figure out what needs to be changing, what advice is actually useful to you. So even if you think you're being very good with your time and going through tons and tons of resources trying to find advice that you feel comfortable with taking action on them, you may finally get to a point where the advice sounds good and you go through with it and it turns out that it's bad and you've wasted your time where you could have just listened to trustworthy resources, whether it's from a professional or by someone who actually knows you personally and is actually trying to figure out the best way to help you, using their advice, even if it doesn't work, pinpointing where it fails, and then forming your own opinion around it and your own actions for them is what taking advice and learning is all about. Not all advice is going to be good, but you're going to need to take action on that advice, whatever it is, to find out if it is good or bad. Even if you're scared of wasting your time doing this trial and error and actually pinpointing the weaknesses in any of the information given and then making your own advice does the opposite of wasting your time. It's going to give you actionable steps that you can use. So yeah, that's it for today, but if you're still interested in learning more about productivity, I now have one-on-one coaching, which you can book a call for with the link in the description. But until then, that's it for today, and I'll see you later.